What is the most out-of-pocket thing your doctor has said to you? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I had a growth on my scalp a few years ago and went to see a skin cancer specialist, who said it was a melanoma and I was going to need most of my scalp removed, without even having a biopsy. He starts telling me to prepare myself for this surgery that will disfigure me. I was about 19 at the time with long hair. He starts saying I'll need to wear a wig and my hair may not grow back and the skin above my eyes will need to be removed. I was petrified. Went home in tears and absolutely petrified. Then my dad took me to his doctor, who took a biopsy. It was just a random skin growth and she cut it off then and there. Far out. Story 2. I was 13 and had something weird down there. I went to the doctor and they asked me if I was sexually active. At that point, I hadn't even held hands with anyone before. I said no and her response, "I don't believe you." My mom was in the room and started arguing with her, defending me. The doctor said, "Listen, your daughter is a pretty girl. I doubt you know what she gets up to." She then says I definitely have herpes and to get ready for how my life will change due to this STD. Absolutely no tests. As soon as she walks out of the room, I fall to my knees and sob. I felt like my life was over. My mom started crying too, thinking perhaps I had been assaulted as a child. 3 days later, no herpes. Obviously herpes is pretty common, but to be told at 13 that I had an STD because I was likely promiscuous, it hurt. My mom called later and reported her. Story 3. I had what sounds like a similar growth on my scalp as well. I showed the doctor and he said I shouldn't be worried. Yearish later I have another checkup and he asks if I still had that thing on the back of my head. I told him I did. And he says, I know I said not to worry about it, but I had a lady in here not that long ago with something that looked very similar. Turns out it was her body's red flag. Her insides were filled with cancer. I'm obviously petrified. Then he says, I can get you in here for a biopsy and stares at his computer. 2 months. I demanded an appointment within the week. It was benign. I immediately found a new doctor. Story 4. My husband went to a doctor about chronic back and neck pain in his 20s. The doctor felt his back, looked in his mouth, and told him he had myotonic muscular dystrophy. He told my husband there was no real treatment and that he would be wheelchair-bound within a few years. Then he referred him to a specialist. We were newlyweds with active hobbies. My husband was a mechanic who made a living off physical labor. We were devastated. A few weeks later, he saw the specialist who promptly informed him that the previous doctor was blatantly wrong. They did genetic testing to confirm he didn't have it. Turns out he had mild scoliosis and arthritis. Story 5. I was having abdominal pain, so my primary care physician scheduled me for an X-ray. The doctor showed me the film, while looking me dead in the eye and said, "You're literally full of crap." Interned with an orthodontist who once had a patient who was an all-around. The orthodontist was reading the X-ray and commented on how round the patient's head was. He said, and I quote, "Look how beautifully round your skull is," as he traced the bone with his pen, and then exclaimed, "And look how void it is," tapping his pen at where his brain would be. Somehow, the guy didn't hear the second bit. I think he was trying to talk over the orthodontist or something. Story 6. Had surgery that needed a tube. I went home after a month and it was still in. When I was hungry, the stitch would rub the skin as my stomach growled. Had to go to the ER a couple days later, false alarm heart attack, and the attending came down to see me. Asked him to take out the tube and he surprisingly agreed. His name was Mo. Asked Mo if it was gonna hurt, he said nah, then proceeded to cut the stitch and said, "Giddy up," just like Kramer, and pulled it out like he was starting a lawnmower. He put a gauze on the hole and told me to hold it, he'd be right back. Thinking that he went to get a suture kit was plain silly and wrong. Guy comes in with a Smurf band-aid and slaps it on the hole. He must have seen the horror in my face and he said, "Doesn't need stitches, but don't eat any mac and cheese for a while," then walked out the door. Story 7. I broke my ankle really badly in 1997 and my surgeon was in the genius camp. Holy crap, that guy was a freak and a half. Favorite thing he did, there were a few. When he took my splint off after surgery, I laid on my back, he's messing with my leg, and he says, "Hey, you want to see something really cool?" He holds my broken leg up, which looks like Frankenstein, mostly green with some purple staples all over the place, and points to some dark woundy things before stopping on one. He says, "You know what that is?" I said, "I absolutely do not know what that is." He said excitedly, "It's a fracture blister." Fracture blisters form when the skin swells rapidly. They keep your skin from splitting. Isn't that awesome? Big grin. I just stared at him and blinked. Story 8. At my first gynecology appointment, I was 15 years old. My mom had scheduled the appointment for me after finding out I was having relations. The doctor examining me was the one who delivered me. In the middle of the exam, with my feet in stirrups and legs spread in front of him, this doctor told me how proud he was when he walked his daughter down the aisle on her wedding day, knowing that her white dress actually meant something. The disgust didn't register until about 10 years later. Story 9. I was 19 and went to Planned Parenthood to do a biopsy of my cervix because my pap smear came back abnormal. The doc performing the biopsy was an old man. As I'm crying from the pain of the biopsy, which they said it shouldn't hurt, it's just uncomfortable, LIS. It was one of the most painful things I've ever experienced. He says, "Well, I hope it was worth having unprotected and you learned your lesson," which made me cry even harder. He had the nerve to ask the medical assistant in the room if I was crying like he couldn't hear it. I saw her face and she just nodded, and you can tell she felt awful. Afterwards, as I'm walking out, he said, "It's ok if you're on top of it, you won't die or anything." I never went back there. Apparently he still works there. This was 7 years ago. I'm still traumatized. Story 10. Had an undiagnosed autoimmune disease. I had gone from 200 greater than 130 pounds and had a plethora of issues, including bleeding out of my ass. After a full battery of tests, his actual words were, "This is the new you. I wish I could give what you have to some of the fat girls that come in here and can't even fit in the chair." Went to a different PCP and the dude had it narrowed down to 2 things in like 30 seconds just by looking at me. One test later and one of the 2 options was confirmed. Story 11. Had to get a surgery that required me to be put under general anesthesia. Before the procedure, the anesthesiologist came into my waiting room to speak with me, and this is what he said. "Doctor, hey Hetty Texel. I'm Doctor, your anesthesiologist for the procedure today. I'm here to chat with you, give you a rundown of what I'm gonna be doing, and help make you feel comfortable with the procedure and help calm any concerns you may have about going under." Me, "Hi doctor, I guess I'm curious about what medicine you're going to be using." Doctor, "Oh yeah. So what I'm gonna be using on you today is the drug that killed Michael Jackson. This was not long after it happened." Me, getting nervous, "Okay. So I guess something that helps calm me down when it comes to giving me drugs is understanding how it works, like what the drug is doing in your body and what mechanisms it activates and all that. Could you help me understand that?" Doctor, "Oh, so that's the funny part. We actually have no idea how it works. Isn't that crazy? But anyway, I gotta go prepare. See you later." Leaves. I wasn't nervous about the procedure at all before, but I sure as crap was after chatting with that dude lol. Story 12. The doctor ran into my room yelling, "Oh my god," then said, "We have to get you to the hospital." The last person I saw here with this had to have a lot of flesh removed. She then proceeded to show me photos of the patient with flesh removed. It was absolutely horrific. I had a spider bite on my elbow. It started off as a very sore spot that felt like I hit my elbow on something. 3 hours later, my entire arm was red, swollen, and hot. When I bent my arm, a steady stream of clear liquid poured out of my elbow. There was no question about how bad this was. The doctor was adamant that I go to the hospital and spend a week with an intravenous drip of antibiotics. She thought that even with antibiotics, I might lose part of my arm. It was obviously a very bad situation, but I live in the US and didn't have insurance. I had gone to the hospital first, but I was turned away. It's not legal for them to do this, but I was young and inexperienced, so I left after the lady at the desk berated me, yelling that you can't expect to just walk in here with no money. I then went to a walk-in clinic, which is where this doctor was. The doctor may not have been good at hiding her fear and panic, but she absolutely saved my arm and quite possibly my life. For the following week, I went to see her twice a day, and she gave me a series of shots and pills. She had a closet full of salesman samples that she gave me, so all the drugs were free of charge. Even though I went there 14 times, I was only charged for the first day's visit, which was only $100. This doctor saved me tens of thousands of dollars. I think of that doctor often and hope that life has treated her as well as she treated me. Story 13. Not a doctor but a dental assistant. It was a somewhat windy day, so I decided to wear a hoodie with a sports bra under it. When I went to my dentist appointment, I didn't know that the dentist assistant was going to check for my blood pressure. So I was kind of like silent because I had no shirt under. So I tried to roll my sleeves up, but it was hard, so I had no choice but to take my arm out from underneath my hoodie. I tried to not show my sports bra or cleavage. I have big boobs, but I didn't hide it well enough because he asked me if I thought sports bras were more comfortable than regular bras, and he also said he liked the color of it. I was kind of weirded out by it, but I tried not to let it get uncomfortable also because I had been knowing him for a while since I would go to the dentist often, so that was the first time he had said anything like that. Anyway, I told him I like sports bras better, but I nervously replied so that he got the hint. He didn't. He asked if I liked shopping for bras at VS, and then I looked at him with discomfort and he said sorry, and continued with what he was doing. Then after he said that it was hard for him to not look, and I covered myself even more until he finished taking my BP. I don't exactly remember when he said this, but he asked if he could touch them at one point. This happened months ago, so I don't exactly remember every detail, but I never went back. Story 14. I was having really bad period pain. It was crippling and the flow was heavy. I was changing a super pad every hour or two or it would leak. 3 separate doctors told me it's normal to have bleeding and pain each month, as if I was some moron who didn't understand female reproduction. I was so ready to slap someone. Turns out I had tumors in my uterus, which only got found because I got pissed and said to don number 3 ok. But before I leave, I would like you to write in my notes that you are refusing my request to send me for diagnostic tests to determine the cause of my pain. He begrudgingly wrote me a referral for ultrasounds, and within 8 weeks, I was having surgery to have the tumors removed. Thankfully benign, but having them removed made the pain go away, and the bleeding was back to normal. Story 15. I used to work in a field research lab that required a lot of physical activity that worked your core, digging holes to find nests. Anyway, I had worked this gig for like 5-ish years, and I not only had gotten fast at digging huge-ass holes by hand, but I had a reputation in our lab for if I couldn't find the nest, it wasn't there anymore, due to me not giving up until a more than reasonable area was uprooted. I am purposefully omitting details for anonymity. Anyway, I got a pelvic exam done towards the end of my career there, and the doctor was like, "What? Your abdominal muscles are rock solid." Doc told me from the inside out my abdomen was built like a brick house. Funniest scenario I've ever been in. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.